The towering glass walls of the Harrington Plaza Hotel reflected the city's golden lights as the evening crowd bustled through its grand lobby. Noah Harrington, the billionaire owner of the hotel empire, had just finished another exhausting corporate event. He loosened his tie, sighing as he exited the ballroom, his mind weighed down by endless business negotiations. He had everything: money, power, influence. But beneath the surface, there was something hollow, something missing that no amount of success could fill. As he stepped into the private corridors leading toward his penthouse suite, his sharp eyes noticed something unusual near the janitor's closet. A pair of worn-out sneakers peeked out from the half-open door. Noah frowned, his footsteps slowing. Curiosity tugged at him, and before he knew it, he had gently pushed the door open, just enough to see her. A young woman curled up in the corner of the cleaning staff's tiny restroom, asleep against the cold-tiled wall. Her uniform was neatly tucked, though slightly oversized, her dark curls falling messily over her pale face. Her breathing was slow, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. Noah's brows furrowed. This was no place to sleep. Something about her stirred something deep inside him, an unfamiliar ache. A woman this young, this fragile, sleeping in a cramped, dimly lit janitor's room. It didn't sit right with him. His gaze drifted to the small backpack tucked beside her, worn out, faded, probably the only thing she owned. Before he could think, his voice slipped out, low, hesitant. "Miss," she stirred slightly, a small sigh escaping her lips. But she didn't wake. Noah's jaw clenched. Who was she? And why was she sleeping here of all places? A sudden wave of guilt hit him. This was his hotel. He prided himself on running a luxurious empire. Yet one of his own employees was forced to sleep in a cleaning closet? Anger flickered beneath his calm exterior. He turned sharply, striding down the hall toward the front desk. The receptionist stiffened when she saw him approach. "Mr. Harrington, who's on the night cleaning shift?" His voice was quiet but commanding. The receptionist quickly scanned the records. Sophie Caldwell, sir. She works the night shift on the lower floors. Should I call her?" Noah didn't answer immediately. Sophie. The name settled in his mind like an imprint. "That won't be necessary," he said. The receptionist nodded, oblivious to the thoughts racing through her boss's mind. Noah turned away, his hands in his pockets, his gaze distant. For the first time in years, something had shifted inside him. He didn't know why or how, but the sight of Sophie Caldwell, sleeping in that janitor's closet, had ignited something in him, something he wasn't ready to ignore. Noah barely slept that night. His mind kept circling back to the image of Sophie Caldwell, curled up in exhaustion on the restroom floor. A billionaire shouldn't be losing sleep over a cleaning lady. But he was. By morning, he had already made up his mind. He needed answers. The next evening, as the hotel buzzed with life, Noah waited. He had instructed security to alert him the moment Sophie clocked in for her shift. At exactly 10:07 p.m., the call came. "Sir, Miss Caldwell just arrived. She's heading toward the service elevators." Noah didn't hesitate. He left his penthouse and took the elevator down, his heart pounding in a way that felt strange, unfamiliar. By the time he reached the lower service corridors, he spotted her immediately. Sophie was dressed in the same oversized cleaning uniform, her hair tied in a loose bun, exhaustion clear on her face. She carried a supply cart, her shoulders slumped under an invisible weight. Noah watched her for a moment. She moved quickly, mechanically. A woman used to being invisible. It bothered him. Taking a breath, he stepped forward. "Sophie Caldwell." She froze. Slowly she turned, her deep brown eyes widening as they met his. For a second, she looked confused. Then fear flashed across her face. She swallowed, gripping the supply cart. "I didn't steal anything, sir. I swear." Noah's brows knitted together. "What?" Sophie backed up slightly, avoiding his gaze. I know I'm not supposed to be in certain areas, but I only clean the places I'm assigned. I don't..." She thought he was here to fire her. Something tightened in Noah's chest. "You're not in trouble," he said carefully. "I just wanted to talk." Sophie still looked wary, as if she didn't believe him. Noah took a step closer, lowering his voice. I saw you sleeping in the janitor's closet last night. Her entire body went rigid. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then she dropped her gaze, her fingers gripping the edge of the cart so tightly her knuckles turned white. You weren't supposed to see that, she whispered. Noah exhaled slowly. Why were you there? Silence. Sophie's lips pressed together. Then finally she said, because I have nowhere else to go. Noah's heart stopped. She wasn't just tired. She wasn't just overworked. She was homeless. Noah's mind raced. His hotel had vacant luxury suites, yet the woman scrubbing its floors had nowhere to sleep. A sharp anger rose inside him, not at her, at the world, at the unfairness of it all. How long has this been going on? He asked, his voice quieter now. Sophie let out a shaky breath. A few months. Noah clenched his jaw. And no one helped you? She let out a small, hollow laugh. Rich people don't notice the ones who clean up after them. Except he had noticed, and now he couldn't unsee it. Noah ran a hand down his face. This woman, a stranger, a cleaning lady, someone society had ignored, had suddenly become his biggest concern. And for the first time in his life, Noah Harrington wanted to break all his own rules. Sophie regretted saying it the moment the words left her lips. Rich people don't notice the ones who clean up after them. She hadn't meant to sound bitter, but she was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. But Noah Harrington wasn't like other rich men. Instead of brushing off her comment, his expression darkened, not with anger, but with something else. Frustration? Guilt? She couldn't tell. For a long moment, he just stared at her, as if seeing her for the first time. Then finally he spoke. You're not sleeping in that closet again. Sophie blinked. What? Noah's voice was firm, final. You heard me. You're not sleeping there anymore. Sophie shook her head, stepping back slightly. Mr. Harrington, I appreciate your concern, but I don't need... You do, Noah interrupted. His blue eyes held a quiet intensity. And I'm not asking. Sophie's pulse raced. This had to be some kind of joke. Billionaires didn't help people like her. She crossed her arms. And where exactly am I supposed to sleep? Noah didn't hesitate. In one of the suites upstairs. Sophie stared at him. Then she laughed. A short, stunned, disbelieving laugh. You're joking. Noah's expression didn't change. I'm not. Her heart thundered. You want me to stay in a luxury suite? The same ones that cost more per night than I make in 6 months? Noah exhaled sharply. I don't care about the cost. Well, I do, Sophie shot back. I'm not some charity case, Mr. Harrington. I may be homeless, but I still have my pride. Noah's jaw tensed. I'm not offering you charity, he said carefully. I'm offering you a safe place to sleep. Sophie's hands curled into fists. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to tell him she could handle it on her own, just like she always had. But the truth was, she was tired. Tired of pretending she was okay. Tired of living in survival mode, always waiting for the next disaster to strike. Still, she hesitated. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Noah's expression softened. I don't know, he admitted, but I can't unsee what I saw last night. Sophie swallowed hard, her chest tightening. Noah wasn't like the others. He wasn't offering pity or treating her like she was beneath him. He just cared, and that terrified her more than anything. She took a deep breath. Okay, she murmured. Just for tonight. Noah gave a small nod, but something in his eyes told her. He wasn't going to let her go that easily. Sophie sat on the edge of the massive king-size bed, her fingers gripping the silk sheets as she tried to process everything. The soft glow of golden light bathed the luxury suite, casting long shadows across the walls. How did I end up here? Just hours ago, she had been curled up in a janitor's closet, invisible to the world. Now she was sitting in a suite worth more than she had earned in her entire life. Her hands trembled as she traced the embroidered duvet. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. A knock at the door made her jump. She hesitated before calling out, "Come in." Noah stepped inside, dressed in a casual button-down with his sleeves rolled up. It was the first time she had seen him out of his expensive suits, and for some reason, it made him seem different. Less like a billionaire and more like a man. He held a tray in his hand, setting it on the nightstand. "You probably haven't eaten properly in a while," he said, his voice softer than usual. Sophie's throat tightened as she glanced at the tray. A steaming bowl of pasta, fresh fruit, and a warm bread roll. Simple but thoughtful. She swallowed hard. "You didn't have to do this." Noah leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You keep saying that, but I wanted to." Sophie looked away, suddenly feeling too exposed. No one had ever cared for her like this before. No one. "Why are you being so nice to me?" she whispered. Noah exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Because I know what it's like to be alone." Sophie's eyes flicked up to him. Alone? How could someone like him, wealthy, powerful, admired, ever feel alone? He must have noticed her skepticism because he let out a small chuckle, though it lacked humor. "Having money doesn't mean you have people who truly care about you, Sophie." A beat of silence stretched between them. For the first time, she saw something in his eyes that she hadn't before. Vulnerability. She wanted to ask more. She wanted to understand him, but she was afraid of what it meant if she let herself care. Instead, she focused on the food, picking up the fork with shaky hands. The first bite hit her stomach like warmth she hadn't felt in years. Noah watched her carefully. "Stay here as long as you need," he said. "No pressure, no strings attached." Sophie looked up at him, studying him. She wanted to believe him, but life had taught her that nothing came without a price. Still, when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Noah didn't smile. He just nodded, his eyes searching hers. Something had shifted between them, and Sophie wasn't sure she was ready for it. The next morning, Sophie woke up to the sound of soft knocking on the door. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. The plush mattress, the silk sheets, the warmth of the sunlight streaming through the massive windows. Then it hit her. She was in a billionaire's penthouse suite. Her chest tightened as she pushed the blankets off, hesitating before answering the door. When she opened it, Noah stood there, dressed in a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up slightly. "Good morning," he said, his voice smoother than she remembered. Sophie swallowed hard. "Morning." He gestured toward the hallway. "I had breakfast sent up for you. If you're comfortable, we can eat on the balcony." Her stomach tightened. Breakfast? On the balcony? What was happening? She should have refused. She should have reminded him that this wasn't her life. But the warmth in his eyes, the genuine kindness behind his offer, it made it hard to say no. "Okay," she murmured. Noah led her toward the private terrace, where a beautifully set table awaited them. The sight of fresh fruit, eggs, coffee, and warm pastries made her stomach twist in both hunger and disbelief. She sat hesitantly, glancing at him. "This feels ridiculous." Noah raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She gestured at the table. "Because I usually eat stale vending machine snacks for breakfast." Noah chuckled, but there was a hint of sadness behind it. "Then consider this an upgrade." Sophie bit her lip. She didn't belong here. And yet, the way Noah looked at her, the way he treated her without pity or condescension, made her want to stay. As they ate, a comfortable silence settled between them. But Sophie couldn't shake the question burning inside her. She set down her fork. "Why are you doing this?" Noah's jaw tensed. He exhaled slowly, choosing his words carefully. "Because I can," he finally said. Sophie frowned. "That's not an answer." Noah leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I've spent my entire life making money, building an empire. But last night when I saw you in that closet, it made me realize something." Sophie's throat tightened. "What?" His gaze softened. "That for all the success I have, I've never actually helped anyone who needed it." She stared at him. He was serious. Noah Harrington, a man who could buy anything in the world, had chosen to help her. It scared her. It thrilled her. And it made her wonder if, for the first time in her life, she had finally found someone who saw her. As she looked at him, something inside her whispered a dangerous thought. What if I'm falling for him? The realization hit Sophie like a tidal wave. She was falling for Noah Harrington. It was absurd, impossible. He was a billionaire, and she was a cleaning lady who had spent the past few months barely surviving. Their worlds weren't just different, they were opposite. And yet, as she looked at him, sitting across the table, the golden morning light catching in his deep blue eyes, she couldn't deny it. Something had changed between them, and she wasn't sure if she had the strength to walk away. Noah noticed her hesitation. He set down his coffee cup and leaned forward slightly, his gaze locking onto hers. "You're thinking too hard," he murmured. Sophie let out a small, nervous laugh. "Maybe because none of this makes sense." Noah tilted his head, curiosity flickering across his face. "What doesn't?" She swallowed hard, forcing herself to say it. "This, United States, you offering me a sweet breakfast, kindness? Billionaires don't just notice people like me." Noah's expression darkened slightly. "Maybe that's the problem." Sophie blinked. "What?" Noah exhaled, shaking his head. "People like me, we live in our own world, surrounded by wealth, power, influence. We think success is about numbers and deals. But last night, seeing you there, alone, in that closet, it hit me." He looked down for a moment before meeting her eyes again. "What's the point of all this if I never use it to help someone who actually deserves it?" Her chest tightened. "You don't even know me," she whispered. Noah gave her a small, knowing smile. "I know you work harder than anyone I've ever met. I know you didn't ask for my help, but you took it because you had no choice. I know you've been alone for a long time. And I know," he hesitated, his voice lowering slightly, "I don't want you to disappear from my life." Sophie's breath caught. This wasn't a simple act of kindness anymore. This was something deeper, and she could feel herself slipping into it, falling into him. But reality crashed into her like a brick wall. She stood up suddenly, her hands trembling. "This is crazy," she murmured, shaking her head. "I can't do this." Noah's brows furrowed. "Sophie, I don't belong in your world," she said, her voice wavering. "I clean hotel rooms. I sleep in janitor's closets. And you're," she gestured at him, "you own the building I mop floors in. This doesn't make sense." Noah stood too, his presence overwhelming in the morning light. "So what?" His voice was steady, firm. "Who says we have to make sense?" Sophie's throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that this wasn't just some passing whim for him, that she wouldn't wake up tomorrow and realize she was just another temporary distraction in the life of a billionaire. But she was terrified of him, of herself, of falling for someone who could shatter her into a million pieces. Noah took a step closer. "Stay," he said softly, "not because you need a place to sleep, but because you want to." Her pulse thundered. She should say no. She should walk away. But instead, she whispered, "Okay." Noah's smile was slow, careful, like he had just won something more valuable than any business deal he had ever closed. And for the first time in her life, Sophie Caldwell felt like she had finally found something worth holding on to. Or maybe someone.